I turned 41 on a Tuesday, and not one person in my family called. That part wasn't new. What was new is that 3 weeks earlier, in May, I had let my sister's birthday come and go without driving the 4 hours, without the card, without showing up. First time in 22 years. And that was the thing that finally made my phone ring. Not my birthday. My absence from hers. My name is David. My sister is Chloe. Same parents, same house on Beckett Street, same two people who could tell you the exact hour Chloe was born and had to check the back of a photograph to get my year right. For 4 decades I told myself it was scheduling. Bad luck. September being a hard month for everybody. I built an entire religion out of excuses so I would never have to look straight at the plain things sitting in the middle of my life. Then my mother showed up at my door holding a shoebox. And I found out she had never once forgotten. Not a single year. Let me tell you what a birthday looked like in our house, because the difference wasn't subtle and it wasn't hidden. It was decorated. Chloe was born in May. Every year, the 3rd Saturday of that month, our mother, Diane, turned our backyard into something out of a catalog. There were folding tables borrowed from the church. There was a sheet cake from Wagner's on Route 9, the good bakery, the one you had to order from 2 weeks out. There were streamers taped along the gutter, and my father, Ray, up on a ladder in his work boots, holding a staple gun, complaining the whole time and doing it anyway. Neighbors came. Diane made her potato salad. Somebody always brought a cooler. My mother would stand in the kitchen window watching my sister blow out candles with a look on her face I never got tired of, a soft, wide-open look, like she was watching something she'd been waiting on her whole life. I want to be clear about something. I loved those parties. I carried chairs. I ran the ice back and forth from the garage. I was genuinely, stupidly happy on those Saturdays. That's the part nobody believes when I tell this story. I wasn't standing in a corner seething. I was 11 years old and glad the sun was out and my sister was laughing. September was different. September was quiet. My birthday is the 9th. Some years, somebody remembered on the 10th. Aunt Sharon, my father's sister, always mailed a card, and it always came on time, and for a lot of years hers was the only one. My mother would say something at dinner like, "Oh, honey, we'll do something this weekend." And then the weekend would come with its own weather. A leaking pipe. Chloe's fall recital. My father working a Saturday at the store. And by Sunday night nobody said the word birthday again, and I understood that saying it myself would be the rudest thing a boy could do. The year I turned 10, I made my own cake. I want you to picture that, because I've had 31 years too and I still can't do it without something turning over in my chest. Boxed yellow mix. I couldn't reach the good bowl so I used the plastic one from under the sink. I got the oven wrong and the middle sank. I frosted it anyway, canned chocolate, and I put it on the counter where they'd see it when they came in. My mother came home from Chloe's piano lesson, set her keys down, looked at the cake, and said, "David, who's this for?" I said, "Nobody. I just wanted to make one." She said that was sweet. She cut a piece for Chloe. I ate 2 slices standing at that counter and told myself it was fine, and the strange part, the part one need you to understand, is that in that moment it genuinely was. Kids are unbelievably good at making the room they're standing in feel normal. It's not until you're grown, until you're 40 and someone asks you an innocent question about your childhood, that the whole thing walks back into the kitchen and sits down across from you. My father came in later that night, saw the cake, and put his hand on the back of my neck the way he did. "You're the easy one," he said. "You know that? Your sister needs a lot. You never need a thing." He meant it as a compliment. I took it as one, too. I spent the next 30 years being exactly the man that sentence built. Here's what nobody tells you about being the easy one. It isn't a personality. It's a job. And once they hand it to you, they never hand it back. By 14 I was working Saturdays at my father's store. Whitaker Hardware, one storefront on Delaney Street, 41 years in the same spot, the kind of place where a man could come in with a broken piece of something in a paper bag and my father would know what it was and where it went. I swept. I cut keys. I learned the register, then the ordering, then the accounts, because I was better with numbers than Ray was and we both figured that out fast and never said it out loud. Chloe never worked a shift. Not one. And I want to say plainly that I've never held that against her, because it was never her decision. She was 12 years old. She was told her hands were for the piano and she believed the adults in her life, exactly like I believed mine when they told me my hands were for the stockroom. That's the thing about favoritism. Both kids get a script. Neither kid writes it. And it takes about 30 years to notice you were both in the same play. She was good, too. That's the other thing people want me to leave out. Chloe had something. There were recitals where I watched my sister play and felt my throat close up, proud in a way that had nothing to do with anything. Whatever my parents poured into her, some of it turned into something real. But the arithmetic in that house never balanced, and I knew every line of it because I was the one keeping the books. The year I turned 16, my mother told me on a Wednesday that we'd go out that Friday, the four of us, to the diner on Route 9. The one with the pie. She said it twice, which for her was practically a contract. I got out of my shift early. I put on a shirt with buttons. I sat in a booth at that diner at 6 o'clock on a Friday night in September and I waited. At 6:40 a waitress named Patty asked if I wanted to order something while I waited. I said no thank you. At 7:15 she brought me a Coke anyway and didn't charge me for it, and I've thought about that woman more times in my life than I've thought about most of my relatives. At 7:30 I walked home. The house was lit up. My father's truck was in the drive. Through the front window I could see all three of them at the kitchen table, and Chloe was crying about something, some boy, some fight with a friend, I honestly never found out what. My mother had both her hands around my sister's hands. My father was standing behind her chair with his arms crossed, doing his serious face. Something had happened, and they had all gone to it, the way water goes downhill. I stood on my own front lawn in a button-down shirt for probably a full minute. And then I did the thing I would keep doing for the next 25 years without ever once questioning it. I walked in the side door, went up to my room, changed my shirt, came back down, and asked my sister if she was okay. Nobody mentioned the diner. Not that night, not ever. I think my mother genuinely forgot she'd said it. And that's the part that eventually breaks you, not the cruelty, because there wasn't any. There was just a family with a limited amount of attention, and a standing decision, made before I was old enough to vote on it, about where all of it went. I didn't get angry. I got useful. And I stayed useful for a very long time, right up until a woman with no history in that house looked around the room one Christmas and asked a question that none of us had ever thought to ask. Her name is Anna. I met her at 29, married her at 31, and the best thing I can say about her is that she has never once in her life been able to look at something crooked and pretend it's straight. The first Christmas I brought her to Beckett Street, she watched. That's all. She was polite, she complimented my mother's ham, she let Chloe talk about the studio she wanted to open. And on the drive home, 2 hours in the dark, she said, "David, can I ask you something without you getting defensive?" Nothing good has ever followed that sentence, and I said yes anyway. She said, "When's your birthday?" I said September 9th. She already knew that. She said, "Your mom asked me tonight. She asked me when your birthday was." I remember laughing. Actually laughing, out loud, in the car. I said she probably meant the date of the wedding, or she was tired, or it was the wine. Anna let me talk. She let me hand her every excuse in the drawer, and when I ran out, she just drove for a while. Then she said, she recited Chloe's due date from 1986 tonight. From memory. To a woman she met 4 hours ago. I didn't answer that. I looked out the window at the interstate and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 10 years old, standing at a counter with a sunken cake, and I did what I always did with it. I put it somewhere. Anna didn't push. That's not how she works. She just started doing something instead. For my 34th birthday, she threw me a party. Nothing enormous. Our apartment, 20 people, mostly her friends and a few guys from the store, and a cake from an actual bakery with my actual name written on it in blue. I hadn't seen my name on a cake since I was 7 years old, and I hadn't noticed that until I was standing in front of it. I invited my parents 6 weeks out. 6 weeks. I called, and I said the date, and I said it slowly, and my mother said, "We'll be there, honey." Ray came. He drove up alone in the truck, wearing a jacket I'd never seen, and he handed me a set of Craftsman ratchets in the original case, and he was uncomfortable for 2 hours and he stayed the whole time. I want that on the record, because my father did a lot of things wrong and that night he tried. My mother didn't come. She had a migraine. She called at 4 in the afternoon and her voice was thin and she said she was so sorry, and I said, "Don't worry about it, Mom, honestly," and I meant it, or I performed meaning it so well that the difference stopped mattering. 11 days later, we all drove down for Mother's Day. Diane was fine. She was better than fine. She had cooked for 9 people. Anna didn't say a word to me about it. She just took my hand under that table and held it, hard, the whole time my sister was talking, and that was the first time in my entire adult life that somebody in a room full of my family was on my side. Here's what I understood on the drive back, and what I refused to look at for another 6 years. It wasn't that my mother didn't love me. I never believed that, not even at my worst. It was that something in her went dark and quiet and careful around me in a way it never did around Chloe, and it had a shape, and the shape was too specific to be an accident. Migraines don't schedule themselves. Something in that woman scheduled them. I just didn't know yet what it was protecting her from. My daughter was born when I was 36, and everything I had filed away came out of the drawer at once. We named her Maggie. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, born at 2:40 in the morning in October, and I have not needed to check that fact one time in the years since. It's simply in me now, the way your own name is. I remember standing in that hospital hallway at 4 in the morning with a paper cup of terrible coffee, and the first thought that arrived, fully formed, uninvited, was, how do you forget this? Not how do you fail to buy a cake? How do you go a whole day, the anniversary of the most enormous thing that ever happened to you, and not feel the date in your body like weather? I called my mother from that hallway. She cried on the phone. She said Maggie's name over and over. She drove up 2 days later with a car full of things, and she held that baby like she was made of smoke, and she was so good with her, so warm, so absolutely present, that I stood in my own living room and felt the floor go soft under me. Because there it was. She had it. All of it. The full-strength version. She just kept it in a room I had never been allowed in. Maggie is the one who said it out loud, eventually. Kids do that. They walk in and put the true sentence on the table like it's nothing. She was 6. It was September 10th, the day after, and she was eating cereal, and she said, "Daddy, why didn't Grandma Diane come to your birthday again?" Again. 6 years old, and she'd already collected enough data to use the word again. I said Grandma was busy. Maggie thought about it, the way kids think, chewing. She said, she came to Aunt Chloe's. And then she went back to her cereal, because for her it was just a fact about the world, like which door sticks in the winter. That was the year the store came up, too. My father was 68 and his hands had started to shake in a way he pretended I couldn't see, and Whitaker Hardware was two things at once, a business that still made money, and the only monument that man was ever going to get. I had been running it in every way that mattered since I was 26. Payroll. Inventory. The contractor accounts. The Sunday nights doing the books at my kitchen table, the same way my mother used to do the bills at hers. Everybody in that town knew whose store it was on the sign and whose store it was in practice. So when Ray started talking about getting things in order, I assumed it was a formality. Then, at a Sunday dinner in November, my mother said, apropos of nothing, that it would be so nice if Chloe had something steady. Chloe's studio had closed after 2 years. Her marriage had gone sideways. She was 34 and living in a rental in Colton, and my mother's face when she talked about it was the same face from the kitchen window, the soft wide-open one. She's got a good head for people, Diane said. Customers love her. My sister has never rung a sale in her life. Nobody was proposing anything. That's how these things work in families like mine. Nobody proposes. Somebody just says a sentence at a table, and it sits there, and everybody hears the shape of what's coming. I looked at my father. He was pushing green beans around his plate and not looking up. And I finally understood that in this family, forgetting my birthday and forgetting my 40 years in that store were the same act, done by the same hand, for a reason nobody had ever said out loud. So at Thanksgiving, I said it out loud. I want to tell you I planned it. I didn't. It came out of me in a kitchen with a dish towel in my hand. Thanksgiving at Beckett Street, the whole cast. Ray carving. Chloe on the couch with her phone. Aunt Sharon by the window with her second glass of wine. Anna handling Maggie. Diane moving between the stove and the sink in that permanent motion she has, the motion of a woman who has decided that if she keeps her hands busy nothing can reach her. I was drying a pan. And I said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" She said, not turning around. I said, "Why do you always forget my birthday?" The water kept running for maybe 3 full seconds. Then she shut it off, and the kitchen got so quiet I could hear the game on in the other room. She said, "That's not true." I said, "Mom, it's been true for 40 years. And she turned around, and I will tell you exactly what was on her face, because it was not what I had spent 3 decades bracing for. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was fear. Plain, animal fear, the look of a person who hears a sound in the house at 2 in the morning. Then it hardened. Fast. It came down over her like a shutter. "Don't do this today," she said. I said, "When can I do it?" "David." My name, the way you'd say it to a dog on a leash. "Not today." Ray had come to the doorway with the carving knife still in his hand, and he said my name too, in the low voice, the one that meant "Whatever this is, put it down." And Chloe had appeared behind him, and she looked genuinely bewildered, and I want to be fair to my sister here, she was. She had no idea. She had grown up inside the same weather I did, and she'd simply never had to notice it, the way you don't notice the ground being level. Chloe said, "What's happening?" And my mother said, to the room, in a completely different voice, "Nothing. Nothing's happening. The rolls are burning." That was it. That was the whole confrontation, 30 seconds long, and then a family of 5 went and ate turkey together and nobody said one more word about it, and if you have ever belonged to a family like mine you know exactly how possible that is. We are extraordinary at it. We can pass the gravy over an open grave. I sat there and I did the math I always do, and I decided I'd been unfair, and I was already halfway to apologizing by dessert. But Aunt Sharon had been standing by that window the whole time. Sharon is Ray's sister. 71, widowed, drives a Buick, says exactly what she thinks after roughly 11 ounces of wine. She's the one who mailed the card every single year, on time, since I was 5 years old. She caught me on the porch afterward while I was loading the car. Cold night, my breath showing, Maggie already asleep in the back seat. She said, "You shouldn't have asked her that in front of everybody." I started to defend myself and she put a hand up. "I'm not saying you're wrong," she said. "I'm saying you asked the wrong person." I said, "What does that mean?" And Sharon looked at the house, at the lit-up windows, at her brother's silhouette moving behind the curtain, and she said something that took the temperature out of my whole body. She said, "Your mother didn't make that rule, honey. She inherited it." I asked her what rule. She wouldn't say. She said it wasn't hers to say, and she got in the Buick and she drove home. But she rolled the window down first. "Go see your grandmother," she said. "Go soon. She's 89 and she's not going to be sharp much longer." My grandmother's name is Ruth. My mother's mother. 89 years old, 4'11", living at a place called Bellwood in Delton, an hour and a half from me in the wrong direction. I'd been visiting her maybe twice a year, which is a thing I'm not proud of. Ruth was never warm. She was the kind of grandmother who inspected you. She'd look at your shoes when you walked in. She had opinions about how you held a fork at 9 years old. She had run her own house for 60 years on a set of rules nobody had ever written down and everybody knew by heart. I drove out on a Tuesday in December. Brought her the lemon cookies she likes, from the place on Delaney, because I've never in my life walked into anyone's house empty-handed. She was having a good day. That mattered. Some days she called me by my father's name. We talked about nothing for 20 minutes. The food at Bellwood. A woman down the hall who plays her television too loud. And then I set the cookies down and I said, "Grandma, I need to ask you about my mother." Ruth's hands stopped moving in her lap. I told her. All of it, plain, no editing. The 41 birthdays. The cake I made at 10. The diner. The migraine. Thanksgiving. And Sharon on the porch saying she inherited it. Ruth listened to the whole thing without one interruption, which for that woman was practically a scream. When I finished, she looked out the window at the parking lot for a long time. Then she said, "What day were you born?" I said, "September 9th. You know that." And my grandmother said, very quietly, "I do know that." I waited. She said, "September 9th was a bad day in this family a long time before you got here. The room did something. I can't describe it better than that. Everything in it stayed exactly where it was and the whole thing moved anyway." I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "It means your mother lost something on that date, and then 8 years later she got you on it, and she has never in her life been able to hold both of those in the same hand." I said, "Lost what?" And Ruth's mouth went into that line it goes into, the line I have seen my mother's mouth make 1,000 times, and I understood in one horrible second that I was watching a gesture travel down through 3 generations of the same family like a chipped plate that gets handed on because nobody has the heart to throw it out. "That's hers to tell you," Ruth said. I said, "She won't." "No," my grandmother agreed. "She won't." I sat there. And then I asked her the other thing, the thing Sharon had put in my head on that cold porch. I said, "Whose rule was it?" Ruth didn't pretend she didn't understand the question. She was many things, but she was never a coward, and I'll give her that at the end. She said, "Mine." She said it looking right at me. I told her, that first year, that we don't make a fuss on the 9th. Not in this house. I told her it was disrespectful. Her voice didn't shake. I thought I was helping her. That's what we did back then. You put a thing in a box, you put the box up in the attic, and you go on and cook supper. I said, "She was your daughter." And Ruth said, "So was Carol," and then she stopped, and something crossed her face that I had never once seen on it, and she asked me to hand her the water glass, and the conversation was over. Carol, my mother's older sister, died in 2011. And in my entire childhood, I had never seen one photograph of Diane on a wall in Ruth's house that wasn't also a photograph of Carol standing in front of her. I drove home in the dark understanding one thing for certain. There was a name I'd never been told. And there was a grave somewhere with my birthday carved into it. I found him in 11 days, and it took 11 days only because I was afraid to look faster. You'd think a thing like that would be buried deep. It wasn't. That's what got me. It was sitting in a county record office in a town 40 minutes from the house I grew up in a drawer any stranger could ask for, available to literally anyone on earth except the one man it belonged to. Daniel Ray Whitaker. Born March 1977. Died September 9, 1977. 6 months and 11 days old. My brother. I sat in my car in that parking lot with the copy in my hand and I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, because everybody expects the crying. What I felt was something colder and stranger. I felt like a man who's been arguing with a locked door for 40 years and finally noticed there's no house behind it. 6 months old. And then, 8 years later, almost to the hour, my mother went into labor on the 9th of September and had me. She didn't choose that. Nobody chose that. That's the part one keep coming back to when the anger tries to get up off the floor. There is no villain in this. There's a 26-year-old woman in 1977 who put a baby down for a nap, and there's the same woman in 1985 in a delivery room hearing a nurse say the date, and there's whatever happened in her chest in that second that nobody in that family ever asked her about, not once, not in 40 years. I drove out to Elm Ridge that same afternoon. Section C, near the fence line. The stone is small and flat and set into the grass, and you would walk past it 100 times. There were flowers on it. Not old ones. Not plastic ones. Real flowers, 3 or 4 days dead, the way flowers get. Somebody had been coming. I stood there in the wind doing arithmetic I didn't want to do, and here's where it landed. Every year of my life, on my birthday, my mother had gotten into her car and driven 25 minutes out to Elm Ridge with flowers in the passenger seat, and then driven home, and made dinner, and said nothing. Every single year. On the 9th. She wasn't forgetting me. She was somewhere else. She was at a grave I didn't know existed, mourning a child I'd never been told about, and then coming home to a house where the other son was waiting to see if anybody would say the word birthday. And Chloe. May. Clean month, no anniversary in it, no ghost standing in the corner. My mother could love out loud in May. She could rent the tables and order the cake from Wagner's and stand in a window with her whole face open, because May didn't cost her anything. I want to be careful here, because this is where a story like this wants to become forgiveness, and it isn't that simple, and I promised myself I wouldn't lie to you. Understanding why a thing happened does not undo the thing. That boy still made his own cake. That 16-year-old still sat in a diner booth until 7:30 in a shirt with buttons. Nobody in that house ever sat me down, at 10 or 20 or 35, and said, "David, there's a reason, and it isn't you." 11 words. That's all it would have taken, at any point across 4 decades, and not one adult in that family ever said them, and they all knew. That's the wound. Not the grief. The silence around the grief. I drove home and Anna was at the kitchen table and she took one look at my face and stood up. I told her everything. And when I was done she asked me the only question that mattered. She said, "So what are you going to do?" And I realized I had spent my whole life answering that question the same way. Show up. Be useful. Absorb it. Make the room feel normal. May was 5 months out. Chloe's 40th. The big one. My mother had already started planning. I said, "I think I'm not going." I have made harder decisions since. I have never made one that frightened me more. Because here's what nobody tells you about being the reliable one. You don't stay because they force you. You stay because somewhere around age 9 you concluded that showing up was the entire reason you were allowed at the table, and if you ever stopped, you'd find out the answer to a question you had been avoiding your whole life. I didn't announce it. That's important. I didn't send a letter, I didn't make a speech, I didn't post anything. I have watched people blow up their families with a well-written paragraph, and I promise you it never works, because a paragraph gives them something to be angry at instead of something to sit in. I just didn't go. Third Saturday in May. Chloe's 40th. I got up at 6 the way I always do. I took Maggie to her soccer game. I mowed the yard. Anna and I grilled that evening on the back patio, and I drank one beer, and I watched my phone sit on the table like a dog that hadn't been fed. Nothing on Saturday. Nothing. Sunday morning, 9:14 a.m., my mother called. I let it ring. Not out of cruelty. I genuinely did not know what my voice was going to do. She called again at 9:40. Then Chloe at 11. Then Chloe again at 11:06. Then my father, who does not use a telephone unless a building is on fire, at 2:15 in the afternoon. By Monday there were 11 missed calls and a text from my sister that just said, "Are you okay?" 2 question marks. 40 years of me sitting in that diner, and it took one absence to earn 2 question marks. I want to say something to whoever's listening to this, and then I'll get back to it. If you're the one who always drives, the one who always brings the folding chairs and stays late to do the dishes and never asks for the thing you're dying for somebody to offer without being asked. If you have ever quietly wondered whether they'd notice at all. I know exactly the specific loneliness of sitting in a full room and being the only person nobody is looking for. If you've made it this far with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and join us every day. Because what happened Tuesday is the reason I tell this story at all. Tuesday evening, 6 o'clock, my mother's car pulled into my driveway. She had driven 4 hours. Alone. Diane doesn't drive 4 hours. Diane doesn't drive to the next county without Ray in the passenger seat reading the exits out loud. I watched her through the front window sit in that car for a long time before she got out. And when she did, she was carrying a shoebox. Not a gift. You could tell from 20 feet. It was an old box, softened at the corners, the cardboard gone furry the way it gets after decades in an attic, with a rubber band around it that had dried out and split and been replaced by a second one. She came up the walk and she stopped on my porch and she didn't knock. She just stood there, and I opened the door before she had to. My mother looked up at me. 67 years old, small in her coat. And she said, "I know you went to Elm Ridge." I said, "How?" And she said, "Because I go every year, David." And this year somebody had walked on the grass. We sat at my kitchen table. Anna took Maggie upstairs without being asked, which is one of the 10,000 reasons I married her. My mother put the shoebox on the table between us and kept both hands flat on the lid, like it might go somewhere. She said, "His name was Daniel." And then she told me, and it took 2 hours, and I'm going to give you the parts that matter. He was 6 months old. He was healthy. She put him down on a Friday afternoon in September of 1977, and she went and hung laundry in the yard for 19 minutes, and when she came back in he was gone. There was no reason. There was no warning. There was nothing anybody did or failed to do. It was 1977 and they barely had a name for it yet, and the doctor at the hospital told my 26-year-old mother that these things happen and sent her home with my father in a truck. Nobody in that family said his name again. Not at Christmas, not at anniversaries, not ever. Ruth came over the following week and cleaned out the nursery herself while Diane was asleep, and by the time my mother woke up the crib was gone and the room was a sewing room. That was the help on offer in 1977. Put the thing in a box, put the box in the attic, go on and cook supper. 8 years later, my mother went into labor 8 days early and had a boy on September 9th. I want you to hear this exactly right, she said. She was not crying. Her voice was flat and careful, a woman walking a plank. When they told me the date, I laughed. And then I couldn't stop. And the nurse had to take you out of the room. She said, I loved you so much it made me sick. From the first second. That's the part nobody will believe. And Ruth came to the hospital, and Ruth sat on the edge of the bed and said the sentence that ran the next 40 years of my life. We don't make a fuss on the 9th. It isn't respectful to Daniel. My mother was 29 years old, for days out of a delivery room, holding a baby she was terrified of loving, and her own mother handed her a rule. And she took it. She took it the way she'd taken every rule that woman ever handed her, because Diane had spent her whole childhood being the daughter who was not Carol, and there is a particular kind of woman who will accept any instruction at all if it comes from the person whose approval she never got. So the 9th became a locked room. And she survived it the only way she could think of, by pouring every ounce of celebration she had into a girl born in May, in a clean month, where nothing bad had ever happened. And you never needed anything, she said. You never asked. You never once asked, David. I said, I was 10. And my mother put her face in her hands, and she said, I know. Then she pushed the shoebox across the table. I want to be precise about what was in it, because I've told this story a few times now and I always get to this part and have to stop. Birthday cards. 41 of them. One for every year of my life. Bought. Written. Signed. Sealed. Some of them stamped and addressed and never put in a mailbox. The early ones in her young handwriting, the loops bigger. The later ones shakier. A few had the price sticker still on the back. The one on top said, on the envelope, in blue pen, David, 41. She had bought it in August. Before any of this. Before I skipped May. She remembered every single year. Every year, she went to the store, and she stood in that aisle, and she picked one out for her son, and she wrote in it, and then she carried it home and she put it in a box in the attic because 44 years earlier her mother had told her that being happy on that date was an insult to a dead baby. She never forgot my birthday. She observed it. In secret. Alone. Like a crime. I didn't open them that night. I want to tell you I did. I sat with that box in front of me for a long time after her car pulled out of the driveway and I didn't touch the lid. Because I knew what opening it would do, and I wasn't ready for the thing it was about to take from me. Here's what I mean. For 41 years I had carried an idea about myself. That I was the one who didn't matter enough to remember. It was a terrible thing to carry, but it was mine, and I had built a whole life on top of it. My work ethic. My marriage. The way I am with my daughter, which is the best thing about me and comes directly from the worst thing that happened to me. If I opened that box, I didn't get to be that man anymore. And I want you to understand something that took me a year of Wednesday nights in an uncomfortable chair across from a woman named Pam to understand. Sometimes we hold on to the wound because the wound is the only explanation we've got, and an explanation is warmer than a question. I opened them in October. One night, alone, at that same table. They were not what I expected. They weren't apologies. She didn't know she'd need to apologize. They were ordinary. Happy birthday, David. You got so tall this year. Happy birthday, David. Dad says you're better at the register than he is, don't tell him I told you. Happy 30th. I hope Anna knows what she has. Happy birthday, David. I am so proud of you it hurts. Love, Mom. 41 small ordinary sentences from a woman standing outside a locked room, talking through the door to a son who was on the other side, wondering why the house was so quiet. There's a thing people say about stories like this. They say forgive her, she did her best, life is short. And I understand why they say it. But I want to give you something more useful than that, because I don't think that sentence has ever actually helped one person in the history of the world. There are two kinds of forgiveness and they are not the same and nobody tells you that. There's the kind she wanted. The kind where I say it's okay. Where the past dissolves and we're fine and I hand her back the 41 years so she doesn't have to carry them anymore. That one I could not give her. It would have been a lie, and that family has run on lies since 1977, and I was done being the one who kept the machine oiled. And there's the other kind. The one that has nothing to do with her at all. Where I stop carrying the question of whether I was worth remembering into every room I walk into for the rest of my life. Where I put it down, not because she earned it, but because my arms were tired and my daughter was watching how a man holds things. That one I took. I took it for me. Now. The store. 2 weeks after the shoebox, my father called and asked me to come down. He had papers on the kitchen table. He'd had them drawn up. Whitaker Hardware, the building, the land, the whole 41 years of it, signed over to me, effective immediately, and his hands were shaking so badly he'd had the lawyer print it twice. He said, "This is what I should have done 10 years ago." And I looked at my father, 71 years old, trying to pay a 40-year debt with a piece of paper because it was the only currency he'd ever learned to hold. I said no. Not the way you're thinking. I didn't walk away from that store. I've run it for 6 years since and I'll run it until my knees go. I said no to that. To the deed as an apology. To a man buying his way out of a conversation he'd had 40 years to have and never once started. I told him I'd take the store when he was ready to sell it to me like a man sells a business, at a price, with a handshake. But that the thing I actually wanted from him couldn't be signed. He sat there a long time. And then my father, who has never in his life said a soft thing without a tool in his hand, said, "I knew where she went every ninth. I never went with her. Not one time in 41 years. That's as close to it as he could get. I took it. You take what people can carry. Chloe knows all of it now. I told her myself, at that same kitchen table, and my sister cried harder than anyone in this story. She said, "I got all of that because he died," and I said no, Chloe, you got all of that because she loved you and she was allowed to. That's not a thing you owe anybody back. We're closer now than we were in 30 years. Turns out the golden child was standing in the same house, holding a different half of the same broken thing. Ruth died the following spring. I went. I held her hand. She called me by my father's name and I let her. Maggie is 13. Her birthday is in October and we make a production out of it that is frankly ridiculous, and my mother is there every year, for hours in the car, first one in the door. And on September 9th now, we do two things. In the morning, Diane and I drive out to Elm Ridge together with flowers. She says his name out loud. Sometimes we stand there 20 minutes and neither of us says anything else. And in the evening, we come back to my house, and there's a sheet cake from Wagner's on Route 9 with my name on it, and my father staples something to the gutter and complains the whole time, and the neighbors come, and my mother stands in the kitchen window with her whole face open. Both. In the same day. In the same hand. It turns out that was always possible. Somebody just had to be willing to say the word out loud first. If this found you tonight, if you're the one who always drives, the one who set the table and waited, send it to 5 people. One of them is sitting in a diner booth right now in a shirt with buttons. Tell me in the comments what your family has never said out loud, and what you'd want the next video to be about. I read every one. 41 cards in a shoebox. Every one of them addressed. Not one of them mailed. She never forgot me for a single day of my life. She just couldn't say it where anyone could hear.